Hello there, my name is Monica Burns, and welcome to Technology Essentials in Education. Today, I'm chatting with Kim Zajac, a speech and language pathologist who works with middle school learners in a public school in Massachusetts. Now, Kim describes herself as an architect of access and a facilitator of communication and inclusion. So, her perspective really comes through in today's conversation on the best ways to support all students as creators in classrooms. She brings a unique lens to this topic because she works side by side with classroom teachers, pushing into classrooms to support student creativity. And she goes through some really practical strategies and big considerations to think about when you want to make sure your learning experiences really support all students. And of course, we even talk about some AI in this conversation on supporting student creators too. So let's get into this conversation. I know you're going to learn lots of things from what Kim has to share. This episode is brought to you by Jotform. Jotform provides an all in one solution to streamline administrative tasks, enhance community engagement, and foster innovation. Using their no code drag and drop forms and workflows, your teams can securely collect and store data, automate tasks, and collaborate on team resources. Educational institutions are also eligible for a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Welcome to the podcast, Kim. I am so excited to chat with you today about supporting all students as creators in our classrooms of today, digital classrooms, all the things we would put into that umbrella. But before we get into the conversation, can you share a bit with listeners? What is your role in education? What does your day to day look like?
Sure. So I'm sort of a self-described architect of access and basically a facilitator of communication and inclusion. My background is in speech and language pathology and audiology, and I currently work in the public schools of Massachusetts, in particular Norton Middle School, where I support middle school learners with a wide variety of strength areas and areas of development, supporting communication and just accessing and engaging in learning experiences. And so the work that I do is through a combined model of pushing into classrooms and integrating there, supporting co-teaching and working with students with my teacher colleagues, as well as working with students separately in independent settings and being able to build skills that we can then transfer and apply across different settings throughout the school day.
And so all of that work that you do really puts you in classrooms side by side with students. And we think about all the things that they do over the course of the day. A lot of their interactions, I would imagine, I mean, what I see for sure, can fall into that consumer category. They're maybe watching something, reading something, listening to something, both inside and outside of the classroom. So as we think about creativity and students as creators today, why is it important to move beyond consumption and position students as creators?
I love that, that idea of helping to arrange opportunities for students to center themselves exactly at that crossroads. And for me, that is the crossroads of empowerment and student voice, right? And so as
Mhm.
human beings, we have this innate sort of natural process of giving and taking. And so being able to consume can bring us ideas, but what we do with that and how that inspires us as learners to be able to communicate and contribute to our community and into our learning setting is very much a creative process. And so making sure that we sort of line things up in a way where students can utilize the tools that are with them inside the classroom or in digital learning spaces to be able to then take what they understood from an experience and make it their own, related to their
Mhm.
prior experiences, their interactions with other classmates, their families out in the community, and really make it sticky. make it relevant and something that they can use in the moment they're standing in that relates to something in the back, right, that they've already experienced, and then bring forward into the future to then transform in new ways that are unique and special to the way that they think and learn.
And just that idea of supporting students as storytellers or as a way to share their learning, may be something that requires a bit of a mindset shift for an educator who's taught in a different, or very specific sort of way, or has maybe spent more time because perhaps their course content just lends itself more, to consumption, right, at first glance. So, what mindset shifts do teachers need to make to support every learner as a creator?
Well, I love that question. And I think one of the most important mindsets to keep to align with that way of thinking is that all communication is valid,
Mhm.
that there is no, sort of pecking order or evaluative um, scale in which we should rate or measure different varieties of expression and communication.
Mhm.
Um, what a student or a learner can express in the form of a 5 paragraph essay can be just as well communicated through the form of a sculpture or a song or a video or a
Mhm.
podcast, through sign language, through all a wide range of communication modalities. And so I think that that mindset is truly important to center in embracing that. Reaching all learners is what we're here to do. We want to create a space of belonging, a sense of pride, and to really
Mhm.
celebrate diversity as something that makes us better together.
I love those examples that you gave because for someone who might not be quite sure what different types of learning artifacts a student might make, right? That's a big list right there of options. And even for someone who's working on embracing maybe a new way of thinking around this, you can also connect it back to consumers, right? We consume and learn through lots of different ways, right? From a podcast, we learn from an audiobook, right? We learn from reading, right? So we can transfer that experience that maybe a teacher themselves has had as a adult learner into the ways that students might create. And with some of those creative tasks, I would imagine there are different ways that you would set up students for success as they're kind of making that product of their learning. So what are some common barriers neurodivergent students face in creative tasks, and how can teachers remove those barriers?
Yes, and there are several examples that we
Mhm.
can chat about, and they're barriers that they impact our neurodiverse learners, but also just people in general,
Yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
one of those that comes to mind is sort of like that blank page syndrome, the
Mhm.
anxiety of just getting started and the paralysis that can come from that. And so there are many ways that we can support students to not feel so stuck in that rut.
Mhm.
We can leverage traditional things like a graphic organizer. We can also provide exemplars and models. But these
Mhm.
days, we are fortunate in that we have, so much technology and artificial intelligence available right at our fingertips that we can lean into thought partnership with models like Gemini or Claude or
Mhm.
tools like Goblin tools to kind of break things down or give us ideas or jumping off points to make that blank page less scary, right?
Mhm.
So just prompting Gemini with, I'm assigning my students a project on the water cycle. Please provide me with 5 options as kickoff starter points or starter
Mhm.
sentences that I can provide to them, and that just kind of provides them a little scaffolded support to get maybe the first sentence down. And then once that's over with, all of that anxiety kind of melts away, and students are empowered and can move that forward on their own with a feeling of I can do this,
Yeah.
and knowing that if they needed a little extra support, they can just let the teacher know and communicate that, and it will be there and ready for them. I think another thing that is also challenging with our neurodiverse population and people in general
Mhm.
is a tendency to lean into perfectionism
Yeah.
and to be a little hyper focused on making sure that the answer or the product is right.
Mhm.
So I think, with students that I work with, a way to sort of mitigate that and try to take it down a notch is to just create low stakes,
Yeah.
um, opportunities for engaging in learning experiences together, kind of having like a sandbox, if you will, to make low stakes opportunities to play with ideas, to engage in mini assignments, and that
Mm-hmm.
you can sometimes incentivize that where it's like, don't give me perfect, give me more mistakes. More
Right.
mistakes
Yeah.
earns the reward. More mistakes means more learning. So that's what we're seeking. So that's another good example of like barriers that can sometimes exist for especially
Mhm.
neurodivergent populations, where there's a lot of really amazing thinking happening, but there could be some underlying challenges as well, like, um, that press on the cognitive load. And
Mhm.
so that capacity and demand. And then when things like executive functioning come into play, that's another area where, we can absolutely support students through the process. But if multi step project is kind of bogging them down and they're not able to initiate or not able to sustain their effort through that, we can do we can create mini lessons, or we
Yeah.
can again, um, you know, lean into say Gemini or lean into the Goblin tools and say, make me a to-do list. Please break this down
Yes.
into
Mhm.
a really detailed list of checkpoints, and that's also something that can grow with the student. Initial supports may require a significant number of breakdowns, whereas toward the end of the year, once that process has been internalized and the ability to self-regulate through increased cognitive load increases, then we've got, back to that, what we talked about at the beginning, the empowerment, the
Yeah.
ability and belief that I can do this. I'm not alone. There are ways to move through this experience and to do it in a way that feels good, and
Yeah.
that there's joy, right? That it's something I want to circle back to. I'd like to do it again. I'd like to do it more.
Mhm.
So need to think about those things as well, and just overall, just providing choice
Yeah.
for students, right down to the location and the space that they're working in. We don't sometimes pay enough attention to the environmental factors. We think about the thinking,
Mhm.
we think about the design and delivery, and what does the work look like, but what does the space look like?
Yeah.
Um, this is leaning in toward the sensory
Mhm.
overload, or sometimes social overload. The social battery can get worn down. What in the environment can we change, right? Instead of focusing so much on the student, what else can we look at to make adaptations and shifts to support the learner to be better able to access their true skills and abilities?
A quick note from the presenter of today's episode, Jotform. Jotform lets you build a form in minutes. Student survey forms, homework submission forms, online quizzes, and so much more. You can start from scratch, or if you want to get a head start, check out their collection of free form templates designed with teachers, schools, and districts in mind. Learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. And I love those examples because for teachers who may be in different roles or different, pathways for embracing, right, bringing more creative experiences for their students, those are fantastic entry points. It might be reorganizing your space or taking a step back to say, like, what's going on in here? Is this overwhelming for someone who I really want to help them focus? Or heading to, a tool like a Gemini, like you mentioned, maybe something that they've used kind of in a short moment, in the past, or maybe as part of their regular toolkit, but they haven't thought to go to do some of the things that you mentioned, right? I often think of leveraging, AI to do things, sure, that are on our to-do list, but also on our wish list. Like, I wish I could break this down, or I'm not quite sure, like, what the entry point would be for a student who is struggling with this particular piece. Like, I know what to ask, but I'm not quite sure where to go. And there may be a tool that might not give you the right answer, that you need, but might start getting your wheels spinning, just like you said, right? As that thought partner. And so I love that example from, a facilitator, educator, instructor side, but then also from a student side, like you might work with a secondary student who has permission or it's appropriate for them to jump into one of these spaces, and they're starting to build those lifelong skills of, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I know I can go to this space and ask for some support, just breaking this down into smaller steps. And so that's, a really empowering thing for a student to move, from one environment, to another and know that they have that as a tool in their back pocket. And so we kind of alluded to this earlier around, student choice, right? Giving them different options. How can some of these, different formats and being flexible with those formats like audio, video, visual design, maybe coding comes into the conversation. How can this open doors for different learners that a teacher might work with?
Well, I think that it just allows them to personalize their experience, right? And to almost look at their learning experience as if it's a menu of offerings and
Hmm.
to be able to select what they consume, what shape or form it comes in, right? It's similar
Yeah.
to what size and what toppings do you want, and what speed would you like that to be played at, and how often would you like to listen or
Mhm.
watch that. So it opens up just a myriad of possibilities for being able to consume not only once and in one way, but multiple times in multiple ways, in a way that fits and suits them. And so there's an ability to go back for reteaching, for review, for just again listening for the key terms, to be able to sort of internalize and
Mhm.
truly learn and understand for keeps, make things again like that
Yeah.
sticky quality that makes it easier to retrieve and then apply. Um, and it also it helps with that executive functioning as well, because when we're consuming things in a way that we have choice in, it means we are going to be ready for accepting it, right? Because we have chosen it. And so it's therefore something that we wanted for ourselves. When it is coming into our ears, or, if we're reading it, or
Yeah.
however the format is, we're ready for it and we're open. And being open to learning is extremely important. And
Mhm.
sometimes when things are coming at students in ways that are incompatible to what their
Yeah.
natural learning process is, it will just bounce back,
Mhm.
because it's not compatible. So the flexible formats allows for compatibility to be maximized, for executive functioning to be supported, and for that sticky learning to happen in a more efficient way and in a more productive way. And this is, again, we're speaking about students right now, but um, just this week, my principal of my school, he puts out a weekly memo, and
Yeah.
the memo
Mhm.
has been in text format with some images for many years. This week, he decided that he would use Gemini, and he used the Notebook LM portion of Gemini. And so we got
Mhm.
the usual memo with the text and the pictures, but we also got an audio recording,
Nice.
right? So
Mhm.
in the podcast format, and we also got a beautiful infographic. So for the educators receiving the memo, we now had a menu of three choices on how we would like to consume and get the critical information to set the week off
Mhm.
on a best note. So that's an example for the adults maybe
Yeah.
listening about how it could impact and be helpful for them to experience different formats. For me, I loved it, and it really helped me to think about, the way we can leverage flexible formats for good for all.
Yeah, and that story, I think, for someone who maybe felt very successful in a traditional school setting, right, as a student, is now a teacher, right, may not, need some of these supports that some of their students need when they have a moment like that, like what you mentioned, right? I sometimes think of it with even captions, like so many people now just automatically put the captions on for anything that they're watching. They would never have said that they need this, right, as an accessibility support, but it has been so helpful for them to make meaning of whatever it is that they're watching, right? And then I think that also provides a level of understanding of how essential, right, some of these choices are, right, for people that they might support, as a student. So, as we're thinking about creative projects in particular, right, we talked about some of those flexible formats. How can teachers identify and build on students' strengths within these creative projects?
Mm. Well, I think we start with the student,
Mhm.
right? And we start by having that communication, that conversation with them. Who are you when you're at your best?
Yeah.
How do you best shine? And how do you do that? What tools do you enjoy using when you're doing these things that make you feel like the fullest version of you as learner? And then if you had to teach someone, if you were going to be the mentor for another classmate, what would you want to teach them if you could choose anything? What would be your role, or what would be the topic, and how would you do it? Right. So start there, but then also take advantage of just natural contexts. Right. So look at your students, your learners, in unstructured times when they're just together,
Hmm.
and assess, what does the energy look like here? What is it that makes this group glow? What is it that makes each individual student glow? And then what what is there the least amount of friction with, right? Like
Hmm.
what goes really well for them? What interests them? What are they curious about? But what also are they able to attain and move with in a way that's not, um, again, like not building up a ton of friction.
Yeah.
Enough friction though that it's the productive struggle, right? So not crossing the line, and then where does the flow, like where does the flow exist? How do we keep the student engagement going?
Hmm.
Where do they do that on their own with the least amount of adult support? And if we can find those things like the energy, the ease, and sort of like that engagement focus, that's when like, okay, that's my entry point.
Hmm.
Those are the things that my students, my neurodiverse students, this is what they're glowing with. And now it becomes, how can I leverage what they're great at, these assets that they have, and help lean that into the empowerment and the agency part of learning,
Yeah.
because when we can help our students see their own empowerment and embrace their own agency, that's where the really amazing creative aspects of teaching and learning can be seen.
And just that idea of, standing back, sitting back, observing, really taking that time and to kind of see where everyone's at. I think that's such a fantastic recommendation for finding your entry point to where, some student strengths and interests might be, right, as you're developing some creative opportunities for them. So, Kim, if educators listening today want to make one change tomorrow, this week, in their
Mhm.
work to really, to better support students as creators, what is just one thing they can do? What should they try first?
I think that the most important thing that they can do is to ask their learners, what are they most passionate about? What makes them tick? And what are the tools that they need in their backpack to unpack that, to learn with that? And what would they need to then be able to, shout that from the mountaintops
Mhm.
in excitement of what they did discover and learn? So, really centering the student choice, centering the student voice, and being that guide on the side, the supporter to the left
Mhm.
of center that is available and has the things, on the menu for to be taken as needed, and to celebrate all learning moments, right? So
Mhm.
there's values in the failures and the iterative process, and there's also value in the shining moments where experiments go as planned, but to equally value all efforts in learning, because it is a journey, and the more we focus on being flexible in that process and celebrating all of the discoveries, the more learning we are actually doing.
And that's fantastic, right? For someone listening today who's ready to take those next steps, a great place for them to start. So, Kim, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I want to make sure anyone listening knows exactly where to go to connect with you and learn more about your work. So, where can they? Where can people connect with you? Where can they go to
Well,
learn more?
well, if they want to see what I'm up to, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Substack. You can find me on my website, kimzajac.com. If interested in joining something that's ongoing, I am one of the community leaders with ISTE and ASCD,
Mhm.
and I co-lead the SEAS community group, which stands for Special Educators and Education Specialists Group. And we meet on the second Monday of each month between 7 and 8 p.m. It is open to anyone who would like to join. And so if anyone's listening and needs information on how to make that connection, reach out to me either LinkedIn or through my website. That would be great. And I'll also be in person at ISTE ASCD in
Mhm.
Orlando in June. So I'm helping to lead a playground there, and I'm presenting in various places. So I should be pretty easy to find in the program. Hope.
Perfect. Oh, good, good. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for all of your time, your strategies, and just really great ideas that you shared with listeners today.
So thank you for having me on. It's always a delight.
This was such a fun conversation with Kim Zajac, and I want to make sure we wrap it up with some key points from today's episode. First, all communication is valid, and student learning can be expressed through essays, sculpture, songs, videos, podcasts, and more. Create low stakes opportunities for creative work so students can experiment without the pressure of perfectionism. Observe students in unstructured moments to identify their strengths, interests, and natural entry points for creative tasks. Flexible formats for both consuming and creating content can support executive functioning and make learning stick. Don't forget to follow along with Kim's work. She shared some of the best ways to stay connected with her. And of course, follow along with what's new on this feed. Go ahead and subscribe so you get those new updates the next time you're ready to tune in. A big thank you to Jotform, the presenter of today's episode. To learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise, head to jotform.com/enterprise/education.